everyone. Welcome to the third webinar of our devlog series. We're very excited to host yet another engaging session today for you. So I'm Vishalini, the founder of Zipy. And just to give you a background, while we are building a product for developers, we decided why not share whatever we are learning with a larger audience here. So security is something that we've been kind of, keen on learning. And while we're building a product for developers, we thought this could be an area of interest for a lot of you here today. So thanks for taking out time. And today we have Naresh Agarwal, who heads R&D at Traceable, which is an intelligent API security platform. And he's also been part of AppDynamics and led teams at both InMobi, AppDynamics. And we often reach out to Naresh for guidance on security. So it's an honor to have him here, Naresh. Thanks for joining it. Welcome. And we can get started now. And before that, I just want to note that you could put in your questions in the chat below. And we'll take up the questions towards the end of, once Naresh has shared whatever areas we'd like to cover around the cloud and the API and data security side. We'd love to make it interactive. So please feel free to share your questions. And do note there is a swag kit for the best question out there. So keep sending your questions. Okay, so welcome, Naresh. To begin with, we'd love to know what got you excited about the security domain and you're building a product in that domain itself. So if you could share some nuggets from your journey and a little more light on the trends in the security domain, that'll be great.
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. Very excited to see Zipy doing this interesting series for developers. Very excited to be part of this. Just to share my journey quickly about how I ended up into cybersecurity. I spent last couple of years in DevOps, almost 7-8 years, where we really got to understand the modern cloud native applications really well, with a lot of understanding of DevOps, dev tooling, challenges, opportunities, specifically around observability, monitoring, and so on. As part of that, we saw an opportunity. Some of us from AppDynamics, we saw an opportunity where I think somewhere around 2015, when the world was moving from monolithic to more microservices-driven, API-driven cloud-native applications, the attack surface was fundamentally changing. If you look at 2005 to 2015, where a large number of applications were monolithic and on-prem, the attack surface used to be mostly at the network layer or at the infrastructure layer. Whereas in the modern cloud native applications, which are mostly microservices, API-driven, which are deployed very frequently, the attack surface was moving away from the core infra layer and network layer, and it was moving closer to end user, business logic, APIs. And that's where we saw an opportunity to do something interesting in API security and application security, because a bunch of us had very deep experience of applications, cloud native applications, and the instrumentation part or the data collection part is pretty common, whether you solve for observability, monitoring, or security. So that's how we ended up into cybersecurity.
Yeah, thanks, Naresh. Yeah, we can see the transformation from monolithic to the kind of microservices. So I'm sure even on the security side, we need to kind of up our game there. So today, if you could throw a light on what are the kind of attacks we have today, or what is the scene on the security side? What are the problems we should be aware of? What kind of threats exist in the industry, and what kind of damage that can happen because of that? If you could share, throw some light on that, that would be helpful before we jump into what we should be doing. If we could understand what kind of threats exist and how it can impact us, that'll be helpful.
Right. Yeah, I think if you take a step back and look at last 20 years, I think if you ask anybody what is the biggest innovation in last 20 years, it's technology, right? The world is becoming digital, right? And software is eating the world, right? Every single day, the technology is touching our lives in deeper ways. But there's a parallel dark side to all the technology, IT stuff, which is the threat from cybersecurity. And this threat, if you go back to 95 when the internet was just started till now, if you see any graph on number of attacks, intensity of attacks, damage from those attacks, the surface area of attacks, it's mind-boggling. It's simply exponential. And I'll just share a couple of statistics to put things in perspective.
Yeah, that'll be very helpful, actually.
Just to put things in perspective, there are cyber security attacks happening, almost multiple attacks happening per minute, to the extent that a large number of US companies has seen data breaches. If you take a data for last 10 years, almost every company would have seen some data breach. And every third company is now buying insurance against cost or the liability of data breaches. That's the extent of these attacks. Right? Yeah. Just imagine 30% of internet traffic, every third request is a malicious request. Every third request on internet, the intent of that request is malicious. It's a bot trying to do something, to try to scrape some data, try to do a brute force attack, getting into some account, getting access to sensitive data, doing some damage. Just few statistics. The average cost of one single cyber attack is $4 million, and it's increasing almost by 20-30% year over year. Just in last 1 year, globally there was $6 trillion of damage, 2 times of the GDP of India. Right, with just one single year.
Well, that's huge, yeah.
Majority of cyber attacks, the motivation is financial gains. 75% of companies saw ransomware attack. 75%, it's a pretty large number. Right? That's the extent of it, right? And majority of them end up paying ransom. One of the very new emerging category of attacks, which we'll cover in more details, is supply chain attacks, right? Which is increasing almost 100% year over year, right? Next year, we are expecting 15 million plus DDoS attacks. Every DDoS attacks is basically millions of requests being bombarded on the target site. So just to summarize, and if you see a time series view of these numbers, everything is growing up by north of 50%, 100%, 200%, right? So this is just as of now, but this damage is increasing every single day, every single year.
So we're kind of just catching up, Naresh, there with the numbers.
Absolutely. I think the attackers, they're always a step ahead of us. They have access to all the sophisticated technology, investments, tools, and everything, right? So they are mostly ahead of us by a few steps always. Right. Now, if you try to understand what are the implications on the companies or early stage startups, right? I think the biggest implication is financial loss because of ransomware. An attack will happen. Attacker will simply block the access to the product, or they will basically bring down your key services, and unless you pay ransom, they will not bring it up. The other big damage is basically it's a huge loss for business, because you are behind. If any attack happens, you're behind by a few months because your focus completely goes on the prevention and the damage control, right? And there's a reputation damage, right? In depending upon your nature of business, if you're in a very sensitive business, or if you're in a very regulated business like banking, there's a huge reputation damage. And again, in a lot of areas, there's a legal liability. Like if you look at Europe, if you do business with Europe, there's a huge legal liability, like GDPR, if you see any attacks like this, right? And a large number of business, they in any such security incident, they are down by a couple of days to a couple of months. So the time it takes to recover is pretty high, and there's a huge loss of business during that time.
Right. This is pretty scary, actually. Okay, so this is like where the startups kind of what is it that the startups should be thinking? Yeah, this is true, actually. I think a lot of people here are from startups, so we can kind of relate to how we act to some of these incidents that happen there.
Absolutely. Now, the main thing is, I think, going back to your question, right? I think majority of startups, I mean, most of my discussions will be around startups. I think that's the target audience here. So majority of startups, I mean, every startup has a lot of stuff to do, limited resources, and a lot of stuff to do to take care of business. So most of startup basically lacks any focus and discipline on cybersecurity, and majority of them will be reactive. There will be a wake-up call one day. There will be some incident happen one day, and that becomes a huge wake-up call, and that's when you started thinking about cybersecurity. But that's not the right way to go about it, because there's a huge disruption to business. A lot of time you will simply go back in history by 6 to 12 months with one single incident, because you will lose business, you will lose customers, you lose reputation, right? It takes a lot of time to recover from one single large security incident. So the right way to go about this is basically think about it and plan about it a little upfront, right? And it's not too much about dollar investment. It's mostly about the right mindset and some basic discipline, which we'll talk about in more details.
Exactly. No, very, very rightly said, Naresh, because that's a problem that I believe a lot of startups face. Maybe they don't even discuss a lot of these issues. But it's great to know that there are some steps that we can take, and that's what we are here for today. So maybe we'll just take a small poll here and check with our participants as to, what is the most critical security issue you have faced today, or something that you are aware of. So to understand, what is it that you might be facing today, or you might have faced in the past, just to get an idea of where we stand. So would request everybody to participate, and then maybe once we have the results here, this would be on for maybe a few seconds here. Naresh, we'd like to know your view on, what are the majority attacks that actually happen. So this is something that we see. So these are the results, I think. Okay, so that's something that you're already working on, Naresh, here. API security issues, we can see 58%. Most of the companies seem to be facing that, and data breaches is second out there. So what in your point, like in your view, Naresh, are some of these attacks that actually happen?
Right. I think this poll looks interesting. I think this somewhat aligns with the real numbers. So I think the attack vectors have been evolving over last few years because the technology stacks are evolving. Especially what is happening is that the distance between the physical hardware and the real application is increasing, right? There's a lot of stuff between your application and the hardware, right? The multiple layers of virtualization, right? Whether it's your cloud or frameworks or app servers or containers and Kubernetes and so on, right? And each of them introduce additional attack vectors, right? So there's a big list of attack vectors, but let me just talk about the top ones. These are the top attack vectors. You see ransomware, phishing, web application attacks, DDoS. DDoS is more common in large internet companies where the damage is pretty high, because the cost of doing a DDoS attack is pretty high. It's not easy for everybody to do DDoS. So there are very large organized groups who can do DDoS effectively. Identity theft, which is mostly breaking into login and authentication. Data breach is again very, very common for financial gains. Insider threat, right? So interestingly, 30 to 40% of security incidents are generated by somebody known in the company, right? Which is really unintuitive, but a large number of threats starts from an employee or from a partner or from a customer. Botnets is another big thing. Every second request is a bot request, and every third request is a bad bot request, as I talked about, right? So botnet is definitely becoming an increasing threat, right? Ransomware, cryptojacking is mostly basically people using your CPU resources for mining of crypto. But let's talk about the attacks which are increasing in intensity and numbers significantly over, let's say, last 12 to 24 months, right? So the top few attacks which are increasing in number and intensity are ransomware, phishing. Phishing is again becoming a huge challenge because by design humans will trust people, and phishing is just a manipulation of human trusting into something, right? Another big category is open source based vulnerabilities, and just increasing. I mean, 80 to 90% of code is these days is open source, right? And that's a huge, it's a big element of overall attacks these days.
True. We keep hearing about these more often nowadays somehow. Yeah, probably because the usage, as you said, has gone up significantly.
Yeah. IoT again is pretty interesting. Again, I mean, just to give example, right? Power grids, right? Every country is struggling keeping the power grids safe. There are large number of attacks happening on power grid, and just imagine a attack on power grid can bring down the entire power system for the country, right? Or a large portion of country. So IoT is another big category, which is a lot of surface area. As the industry become modern, IoT will be a big threat. I think we talked about insider threats. And then there are a couple of new attack vectors like Web3 crypto, data poisoning, where basically attackers are trying to figure out ways to even manipulate the training data in ML models. This is something new, but again, this has huge implications, because if your training data is wrong, your ML models will behave wrongly.
Okay, so we wouldn't be able to trust ChatGPT going forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So every advancement in technology has a parallel dark side of it in cybersecurity. I mean, as I said, right, hackers are always one step ahead, so they will keep looking for more opportunities always.
Got it. Wow. So, so Naresh, then in your view, what are the significant areas? Like, we won't be able to cover everything today, but what should be the core areas where companies should focus on? And maybe we can talk about where startups could focus on primarily. What would be the starting points in their journey? Like, a lot of people here are probably building something from scratch. So what would be those maybe a few core areas that you could share about?
Right. Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is basically in cybersecurity. It's too big as a landscape, too vast as a landscape. So the biggest challenge is where do I start from? There are too many options, too many solutions, too many things to do, right? There's a long list of roadmap, but where do you start from, and how do you identify the top 5 or top 10? Because everybody has very limited resources, right, to invest on. So that's the biggest challenge. So identifying right or MVP, the first 1 year, first 2 years is very important. Right? The other common challenge I've seen is basically, hey, what do we do? Who will do cybersecurity for me? Should I hire somebody? Will it be a SRE team, and so on, right? And then again, compliance is another one, right? Again, it depends upon what you do as a business, but in a lot of businesses, compliance is important, and the burden is increasing, right? And if you don't invest early, then it will start impacting your business, because your customers, your partners will not work with you unless and until you have certain kind of compliance, depending upon what you do as a business.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's becoming a kind of a mandatory thing, especially across a lot of SaaS companies that we are coming across.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, if we have to look at the top, let's say top 8 to 10 areas of focus for a startup, and again, this I'll go a little bit details of when does it make sense to invest in what area, but the top few will be the shift left security, and we'll go in more details, cloud and application security, data security, and governance, risk, and compliance. And then if we get time, probably we can touch upon a few other topics.
Yeah, sure. So Naresh, maybe we can go deeper into, shift left security. Some of us who may have heard it for the first time, we'd like to kind of go into a little bit detail there. And what kind of tools we could use, maybe we can touch upon that as well.
Sure. So shift left, I think relatively it's a new phenomenon. I think it started around 2015. So traditionally, in the cybersecurity, there was hardly any collaboration between engineers and security teams, right? Engineers will build a product, push it to production, and then security will come into picture. So security traditionally was the afterthought until 2015 or so, right? completely two disjoint teams will not talk to each other. Structurally, they were very, very misaligned. And around 2015 is when basically there was a lot of effort to see, can we blend or integrate security as you develop the software, right? So I'll come back to this later. So fundamentally, shift-left security means that you integrate security as part of your development lifecycle, which means that security is not the problem of security teams. Right from design, coding, testing, operations, everybody has to think about security in their respective areas and put a lot of automation in place, right? And this will help to find a large number of security gaps upfront, even before things are getting pushed to production. So that's fundamentally shift left, right? And so if you look at this slide, right? So basically, pre-shift left, you will start thinking about security once things are pushed to production, right? And the shift left, you start thinking about it right the time of development, right? I think the biggest impact of this is basically the cost of fixing security issues has been reduced significantly, because you can find at least 80 to 90% of vulnerabilities, gaps before things are getting pushed to production, and hence you can keep your software a lot more secure with lesser investments. So let's go a little bit deeper in this. There are multiple components of shift left security. I'll go a little bit deeper in a few areas. You might have heard of SAS, which is static testing, DAST, which is dynamic testing, and then SEA is the most popular. Database security scanning, which basically identify vulnerabilities in your database. Data scanning.
As we could take a quick poll while Naresh is rejoining. There is a what is a good stage of the startup to hire a dedicated security engineer? Naresh had touched upon it, so maybe while Naresh is trying to connect back, yeah, he's there. In the meantime, we can try to answer this particular question, especially for startups. Like, do you wait for a 1 million ARR to be hit before you get somebody, or you wait for enough money in the bank to pay for one? What is a good time for you to decide to have somebody taking, care of the security side of things? Okay, so we have an interesting answer there. Whenever you have enough money to pay for one, and maybe 10 paid customers, that's the second answer that we have there. So it's a matter of affordability, Naresh, when you can hire a security engineer. We were just talking about when is it a good time? So we got a very interesting answer. Like, it's more about affordability. I think we kind of deprioritize it, just like health, I think.
Makes sense. And by the way, there are ways to handle that. I think it's totally okay at early stage just to develop a champion, somebody with some skills, can be a SRE DevOps person, just being a champion and start implementing super basic stuff. That will take care of at least 70-80% of landscape.
Got it. Yeah, we'd love to touch upon that. So we were talking about maybe we can get back to shift left security.
All right. Yeah. So basically, I was trying to explain at what stage of different stages of development lifecycle, what makes sense in terms of shift left. So when we do the code, when we write the code, static testing and the config scanning are important. For any dependencies, any components that we use, it could be a library, it could be container images. The software composition analysis and the container scanning are very, very important. And we go a little bit deeper in these later on. Once the application is developed, then you can do runtime testing using DAST. I'll a little bit go in deeper into how SAST and DAST are different, but kind of complementary. IST, I'll not touch upon. IST is the advanced form of DAST, but I'll not touch upon that. And then once things are pushed to production, then you go into the runtime security, like cloud security and so on.
Looks like there's a lot of discipline required here, Naresh, overall.
Absolutely. So I think it's mostly about the mindset and discipline and a lot of awareness, right? And I'll touch upon, there are a lot of simple to use open source tool, right? Which can do a lot of stuff for you. So it's more of a understanding the basics well, having a basic discipline in integrating these tools as part of SDLC, and that itself will cover at least 70% of security landscape well. So as you can see here, the SAST basically covers doing development and testing, and the SC is very, very important. The SC is one of the most important part of shift left, because every single application is becoming more and more dependent upon open source, and the SC is where basically it will catch all the basic vulnerability in the third party. So if you see here, basically, I'm trying to explain a little bit deeper level. These are the different stages of writing code: pre-commit, commit, build, test, deploy, and production. So at each stage, we have to pick the right shift left tool. So till commit, it will be SAST. Once you've started building the software, which uses the dependencies, then the SC come into picture. Once the application is built and it's ready for testing, that's when the tests come into picture. And finally, when things are ready for production, you start doing advanced form of testing.
Got it, Naresh. And if you could touch upon some of the tools that we could use in each of these stages.
Yeah, so I think this is important to understand what is the basic difference between SAST and DEST. So SAST is mostly white box testing, whereas DEST is black box testing. SAST depends upon the source code, where the DEST needs the running application. And SAST will be able to find the issues early, whereas DEST will find the issues when app is ready for testing. This is the overall pyramid of testing. I don't go in details here, but basically, again, there's different levels of maturity.
So while we're talking here about shift left, we have so many things to talk about, right? Infrastructure, data security that you just touched upon. I think it's just the tip of the iceberg here today, Naresh. So while we are bringing the slides back, would you like to just touch upon very quickly on high level, like some tools maybe that, you just showed us, like different stages where we could put them, touch upon some of the tools that we have. I remember you spoke about some of those tools that were there, like for SAST, for DASH, like are there any particular tools that, we could?
Yeah, absolutely. So Manisha, can go to next slide. Yeah, so I think in the shift left category, there are a bunch of good tools available, very matured, very bigged out tools from open source, like for SCA dependency check from WASP is very, very thorough tool. It will do the job, will help you find the vulnerability pretty much from all the different languages. It is very good coverage across different languages. Similarly, for container security, there are a bunch of open source tools with the option for enterprise licensing, like Aquasec, Sysdig, Anchor. For SAST, Dependabot from Git is very good, and then there are other tools like Checkmarks and SonarQube. For DAST, Zap and Burpsuite both are very, very popular tools. For ISE, the config scanning, there are a bunch of tools like Checkov is very, very popular. And I put a link which has a long list of tools in different categories here.
Yeah, this is super helpful, Naresh. I'm sure we're all taking notes, and we'd also love to know, like, there's this whole bunch of tools. When and where can we start using? At what stage? Maybe we can touch upon it a little later. So moving on to the next point, Naresh, you spoke about infrastructure and data security. So maybe we can quickly touch upon those, and I'll keep a check on time. Maybe we can spend another couple of minutes on that, and a bit on the compliance side of things as well. Like, we spoke about the requirements on the SOC 2, GDPR, etc. side. So if you can touch upon these couple of points before we have a lot of questions from the participants as well.
Maybe in the interest of time, probably we can just jump to this compliance part.
Sure, Naresh. So we'll go to this.
Yeah, I think let's spend some time on this. I think this again is very, very relevant. I would to startups, and again, I think most of startups struggle getting the first certification, right? So first of all, it very much depends upon what you do as a business. Some business will have much more higher requirement of compliance than others, especially if you're in finance, insurance. If you deal with a lot of government stuff, then chances that you would need compliance are very, very high. And it's all about putting right controls and monitoring and have a discipline around privacy, risk, and so on. There are a lot of different compliance. Some of them are specific to country. For example, SOC 2 is mostly needed if you want to do business in North America. GDPR is very popular in Europe and so on. So depending upon what business you do and which countries you serve as customers, you pick the right compliance.
It would also depend on the kind of customers you have, or is it like
Absolutely.
across? Yeah.
No, I think that's a very good point. I think so typically, if you go after large enterprise, that's when the requirement will be more. So typically, you can, if you have customers mostly in SMB category and mid-market, the requirements are on the lower side. The moment you start selling to large enterprise or sensitive customers like governments, that's when the requirements are much higher. Compliant.
Right.
So just as example, I'll go in a little bit more details of SOC 2. SOC 2 is one of the most commonly used compliance if you do business in North America. And SOC 2 has pretty high overlap with the GDPR and ISO compliance. So if you are able to do a good job on SOC 2, you can easily get certification for the compliance. Yeah, so essentially SOC 2 is all about making sure that the right controls around data management, data of clients, data of partners, employees, and all of that.
Got it. And given we have so many remote hybrid teams nowadays, it's still doable, right? Initially, I remember a few years back, this used to be very tough, but now it's relatively easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So SOC 2 has 5 different pillars: security, availability, confidentiality, integrating privacy. So again, depending upon the nature of business, you would need a subset of these pillars to be covered. But most popular, most common ones are privacy, security, and confidentiality, which are most commonly used as controls. And each control, for example, security, very basic stuff like do you use multi-factor authentication for your employees? As basic as that. For availability, do you have basic controls around availability of systems, around alerting and monitoring of systems, right? So most of this stuff is basic, but it's mostly around putting right checks and balances and have continuous monitoring of those controls in place. So let's briefly understand, right? What's the process to get a SOC 2 certification? So the first step is out of those 5 pillars we talked about, what are the right pillars, depending upon nature of your business and depending upon what customers you target and in what countries. Once you have identified those subset, you have to work with the audit firm. There are a lot of audit firms globally. You can pick a firm which has a lot of good experience. The first thing they will do is basically they will give a list of controls and ask for a lot of data against those controls, and they'll provide a gap assessment. And after that, you have to go through actual audit, where in the actual audit, they will ask for specific samples. They may say, hey, show me whether you did the right onboarding for this employee XYZ. Show me what you did when a security incident happened on that date. So they will get an entire population of incidents and issues, and then for specific samples, they will ask for more details from you. And once basically they verify all the details, finally the certification is given.
And it's not one time, right? You have to keep doing these audits regularly.
Right. Yeah. So once you do, yes. So at least you should do it once in a year. Yeah. So this basically, so the first time is hardest, and there's a lot of hard work in getting the first time SOC for any compliance, right? And it takes a lot of time. The time it takes is much more than we anticipate. So it easily takes 6 to 8 months in the first time, but once you learned it once, and it's a SOC 2 is a very good forcing function to start putting the basic controls around cybersecurity, availability, and all of that, right? So there are 2 different kinds of SOC 2, SOC 2 type 1 and SOC 2 type 2. Depending upon the nature of business, you may need just type 1 or you may need both type 1 and type 2. But typically, make sure that you plan it well. It takes 6 to 8 months of time to get end-to-end process done. And once you've done it, I think the next time it will be a lot more easier and shorter, and you need to do it every year.
Yeah, very true, Naresh. We just got ours done, so we know the whole process. It's pretty lengthy.
Absolutely. It's pretty complicated.
Great. So that was about Saktu, Naresh. So just maybe we can take a quick poll in the meantime. Like we thought we'll also talk about budgets a little bit and understand what kind of spend we usually kind of allocate, what kind of budget, especially when you're starting off and you have, limited budgets. What is the kind of budget you put into overall dev tools and security spend? Like what is the money that goes into there? So yeah, the last one would be applicable for me. I mean, I wish I had an idea when I started off because I really didn't. And as we are growing, we are realizing that there is a decent budget that we should kind of allocate for this. So Naresh, in your view, like maybe we can get a cheat sheet from you on how much should we be investing at what stage as well. So, okay, so the result says less than $1,000 per month on both. So, is that enough?
Yeah, I think as I said, 80% of this is not dollars, it's discipline.
Okay.
So a lot of us may think that, hey, we just need dollar investment. That's not true, actually. 80% of this is just the awareness, build champions, and discipline. And a lot of open source tools are there, right? So until a certain stage, you can use a lot of open source. But once you cross this stage, of course, you need some basic investments, right? So I think I've tried to put together a slide, the run book.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that this is one question which I get very commonly, right? Like where do we invest? As I said, the landscape is so big. There are so many tools with a lot of overlap, right? So I tried to put together a framework that, depending upon stage of the startup, depending upon how much customers you have, how much revenue you have, you can figure out what to invest, where to invest, right? So at a very early stage, super early stage, almost when you have no customers or very few customers, probably don't need anything, right? In terms of dollar investment, you can use cloud WAF, whatever cloud you're using, AWS or Google or Azure, right? Each of them will have a web application firewall. Simply use the web application firewall and a load balancer like Apache Proxy or Nginx, depending upon the tech stack. On the compliance, you can have at least a basic stuff like basic policies and process around onboarding employees, basic policies around access to production data and so on, right? Now, as you grow to the next scale, when you have 10 to 50 customers, you have a couple of millions of revenue, right? That's where I think hiring one engineer makes sense who has basic security skills. Again, in terms of investments, most of it would be open source. You can have some minimum investments on things like CSPM, cloud security posture management. Now, in the second stage, what makes sense to do is have basic investments on the shift left. This is where you start investing into shift left, right? At least you start deploying SAST and SCA and start looking at those vulnerabilities as part of your CI/CD pipelines and start fixing them, right? CSPM becomes very, very important, which will give you a very comprehensive view of all the misconfigurations. So investing into CSPM makes sense at this stage. Again, depending upon the nature of business, you may consider a third-party pen testing every year. Basic endpoint security to secure the machines of employees, which is mostly antivirus, ransomware, malware protection is very, very important. Because if we can't keep our machines secure, then the hackers can easily enter into broad data, which will be very, very damaging, right? And again, some basic logging, auditing, depending upon, you can always use the logging of the cloud provider. And at this stage, you also need a basic incident response. If an attack happens, what do you do? How do you deal with that? So basic incident response process is needed at this stage. On the compliance side, I think at least you should have basic policies being documented, and some basic discipline should be followed, depending upon the nature of business. Now, the next stage is when basically now you are at a growth stage where you have a lot of customers and you're looking at growing revenue significantly. I think at this stage of time, you need dedicated security incident, because as you grow bigger, the hackers will be after you a lot of time, depending upon what you do as a business, right? So this is where I think you need to go deeper into security, and the security is all about defense in depth and multi-layer security. You just can't have one single gate. You need to have multiple gates depending upon the tech stack. And in this, basically, you can introduce deeper security layers depending upon tech stack, like API security and so on, right? And it's also advisable to have a bug bounty program, right? If somebody find a vulnerability, they should be able to report to you, right, with some incentive. And also internal pen testing through a red team. For compliance, you need to have rigorous controls with a lot of automation on policies and regular access reviews and a very tight process to deal with incidents. These are the high-level thoughts, depending upon what stage you are as a company.
This is just mind-blowing, Naresh. I think we're all looking for something like this. So I think, again, I'll just to keep a note of time, we have a lot of questions. So maybe I'll hand it over to Karthik and he can take up the questions now.
Yeah. Thank you, Vishalini. Thank you, Naresh, for such an insightful webinar. So many insights for all the startups here. We have some interesting questions from the audience, and I would like to invite a couple of them live to ask the questions themselves. So the first one is from Prabodh from Sprinto. Prabodh, I'm unmuting you. You can ask your question.
Sure. Can you hear me, Karthik, Naresh?
Yes.
Yes, Prabodh.
Thanks. Thanks, Naresh, for doing this session. It's pretty useful. So I can relate to most of the stuff you're saying. I'm also working in the same space. So one question I have is, like, I think shift left security, right? I think shift left testing has been like a thing in the world for like some time now. Shift left security also has become like a mainstream thing. How often do you see that? Like, I'd also like to make it part of the CI/CD pipelines of the companies, but how good is the tooling to get you started? Because a lot of the tools generally we see are either too costly to set it up, especially from a security point of view, or that's the first part of the thing. How mature is the tooling which can help you get started quickly? And the second part of that is, how do you find these champions in this, in your experience of dealing with this, right? Who is the general champion for this cause? For example, is the testing team which takes care of security also, or is it the devs who are running the show there, or is it
right.
How do you champion this cause in the team?
Sure. So the first part of the question, I think in terms of tooling, as I briefly touched upon, I think there are very matured open source tools, right? Especially for SAST and SEA. I think your starting point in shift left will be SAST and SEA.
Yes.
For both of them, there are very matured open source tools. So I think you should pick one of those matured open source tools, deploy them, integrate them as part of your CI/CD, start looking at reports. And in terms of fixing, basically, again, you may not be able to fix everything, just like bugs. You probably start fixing issues where the CVSS score is more than 8. You maybe just start fixing the critical vulnerability to begin with, right? Now, in terms of who, at early stage, who are the people who can help with this, right? So this will be more closer to DevOps and engineers. So if you have DevOps engineers, they can pick it up as a skill. And if you haven't hired DevOps, then engineers themselves can pick this as a skill. This is not super hard. With some basic training and spending a couple of weeks, you can easily pick skills to identify the vulnerability and fix them. A lot of the fixes are very straightforward. A lot of fixes are just updating libraries, patching, or fixing input validation and so on. Fixes are not very complex in shift left. It's more of a discipline and ownership. Somebody needs to look at those vulnerability on day-to-day basis and fix them in time.
Yes, it makes sense. I think we use depend about ourselves. So I think there are a bunch of tools which I was trying to understand from your experience. But thanks for sharing those.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Prabodh. The next question would be from Abhishek. Abhishek, I'm inviting you.
Hi guys, I hope you are able to hear me, right? So
Yes,
I'm Abhishek Ali. I work at Jai Kisan, and I look after the cloud infrastructure and security ops here. So my question is basically, what is the right way for a startup to look at incident management and disaster recovery? Like, what should be the things to focus on to start the implementation? How do we get it rooted deeper into the culture of software development and daily operations that go on into the teams? And what is the right amount of funds, or how do we convince management to allocate more resources and funds towards these things?
Sure. Thanks, Abhishek. So the first part, incident response, it can be as basic as having alerts on the security incidents. The alerts can go to a Slack channel, or if you have PagerDuty or option, you can just put them on them. And then there has to be some basic on-call system, just like you would have some on-call team or on-call system to deal with your SaaS operations issues. You need something similar for security. And at early stage, it can be the same person doing both, right? So just you need some alerting on the top issues and some 24/7 or 12/7 on-call system who look at those alerts. And depending upon the severity, you can have SLAs. For example, if there is a critical severity incident you found, the SLA could be 24 hours, right? And then this person has to work with the right teams to get the issues fixed at the right time. So it can be as basic as that. And as you have more resources, as you mature, you can put advanced systems in place around the incident response. But again, it doesn't need a lot of dollars. It's mostly around people's availability to look at issues in a very disciplined way. The second part, the BCP. I think BCP is very, very critical because the security incidents can bring your system down, and you don't want any disruption to business. So you need to make sure that the entire services should be able to bring. You should be able to bring back that business within couple of hours, right? So the standard process for BCP is pick a different availability zone and just take the backup of all the data every hour, every 30 minutes, every 2 hours, depending upon the sensitivity of the business. And then you need to have proper scripts which can take that backed up data, restore the systems, and bring up all the services within X number of hours, right? And this BCP, there has to be fire drill every quarter, every 2 quarters, to make sure that your BCP scripts are working fine. It's mostly regular backups in a different availability zone, and scripts in place to restore the system using the backup data.
Thank you so much, Naresh. Thank you, Abhishek, for the question. So is it okay if we take one last question, Naresh?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Interest of time. So the next one is from Giriraj. Giriraj, I'm allowing you to talk.
Hi, Naresh. Nice to meet you here. And hello to the Zipy team. So in my experience, right, while it's great to look at open source options or freemium versions for AppSec, these tend to be noisy, or they may not do a in-depth analysis. And I think what happens is it defeats the purpose of, let's say, the shift left paradigm if your developers are chasing false positives, or if you miss out on the real defects, right? So while a startup may look at an open source to start, eventually as they get mature, they might want to look at a more mature commercial option. So what are your thoughts on that, Naresh? Just wanted to hear.
Right. I think so. If you take a step back and look at the different feature set, right? I think the most important is coverage. How good is the coverage of open source versus commercial tool, right? The second one is the reporting, dashboarding, the typical enterprise features, right? I think the coverage part is pretty good for open source, at least as far as I know. Like if you look at the OWASP dependency check, that may be better than some of the commercial tools, right? Because there are tons of researchers contributing to those tools every day, right? So, but I think when it comes to enterprise features, right, you will not find very good reporting, dashboarding, or user management. All that is definitely not good, right? Another bigger gaps I see in the open source tool is the correlation of vulnerabilities from different sources and doing dedupe. So, for example, as you rightly pointed out, right, there are a lot of false positives, right, in SaaS especially. So there's no good way to correlate a vulnerability reported by SaaS tool and desk tool and some other tool in shift left and dedupe that, which is very, very important. So which these commercial tools have started providing that, right? So, but I think as far as the basic coverage is concerned, I think open source is a very good starting point. But definitely it will not have great enterprise-ready features, but it's still a very good starting point. And based on the affordability, you can always upgrade to enterprise versions.
Right. Well, thanks, Naresh. Thanks.
Thank you, Giriraj. So due to the interest of time, we'll have to stop here today. Thank you so much, Naresh, for such an insightful webinar. And I'm sure a lot of startups here, a lot of CTOs, young developers into security here today who have joined us must have taken a bunch of notes and a lot of insights. So for the rest of the questions that we missed out, we have a Discord channel that has been posted on the chat. You can join the Discord channel and we'll try to get the answers to these questions there. And out of all the questions asked today, we would be soon announcing the winner of the Dev Swag Kit for the best question of the day. And you can check that on our social media channels soon next week. So we'll be logging off for today. Thank you so much, Naresh.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.